is going to be a talk about impactful network automation, following up Joseph's great talk. It's going to be our good friend Brad Zellefrow. He's coming from one of our founding sponsors, Ductus, and he's going to talk to you a little bit more of the people side of the equation on that case. So give it up for Brad, and let's keep it going.
Can everybody hear me? Yeah, we're good. All right, great. Well, first of all, I want to thank everyone who's put this together. I'm really excited to be here in front of this audience, which is a very sympathetic audience for what I'm presenting today. I'm really looking forward to any questions that you guys have regarding what we're going to discuss. And what we're discussing is actually not just the automation that a lot of people have discussed today. A lot of people have gone down to the technical implementation details and in their particular domains using tools that they are very familiar with. So I didn't want to rehash a lot of those technical details. What I want to discuss today is how to make sure we're getting impact from that automation. We're going to be discussing failures, some successes, a whole lot more failures. As you see, I got the data to back it up. And we're going to look at ways that we've worked with organizations to ensure that whatever automation we build actually achieves the goals that we want. Before I go into the presentation, I can just kind of give an overview of why I'm speaking to this topic. At Ductus, we are primarily network automation consultants. And I, in my role, work with a lot of different teams to understand what the high-level outcomes should be for their automation programs. They'll come to me with some high-level objective. Typically, they just say, we got some budget. They'll throw it at us, and they'll say, make sure the automation works. But then we find that over the course of the engagement, we actually didn't target a metric. There wasn't a clear outcome in mind. And that's one of the reasons that automation projects fail. And don't take my word for it. There's a whole bunch of surveys that we got coming up that will speak to this. But of a survey that was conducted by EMA that covered a broad swath of people involved in automation, from the development of it to the operation of it to the monitoring of it, they found that only 18% of participants reported success. And success in this context is an automation program achieving all of its goals. So if it partially achieved what they'd set forth, it's still in the failure bucket here. And I had my suspicions. They were validated by a lot of these different surveys. And I presumed that the majority of these are not technical failures. Once we're operating at a certain scale and maturity with our automation, it is in fact the business challenges that present the biggest obstacle to overcome. And so what we're going to be discussing today is what those common automation failures are. We're going to be looking at strategies that we've put in place to anticipate these challenges. It's very contextual to each individual automation program that we build, but we found some similarities between these different engagements that have allowed us to create kind of a common vocabulary that speaks to a lot of these challenges that arise at scale. We're going to talk about an automation factory that is capable of addressing these concerns and promoting company-wide automation. And then we're going to take a look kind of a bit more granularly at automation platforms. What are these architectures that are being built? How do we define what we should build? What impact are we trying to make with the automation we build? How can we align our organization? And then making sure that it's future-proof. We're resilient and ready to change in response to the changing business conditions. So what we're not going to be talking about is the value of automation. I think everyone here in this room has struggled with really complex manual processes and is very well aware of what automation could do. We're also not going to be chatting about any of the technical implementation details, because again, that's probably better served with other experts' talks before mine and after mine. So the first kind of myth that I want to address, and this is a myth I had to dispel in my own mind as well, is that automation is not software, right? There is software. Software is the fundamental component of it. But it is all of the complexity of software with additional layers of complexity organization-wide. So, for an example, let's just assume, also every logo here is going to be just generic. We're going to have a bunch of different tools that represent different functions within a network automation platform. But in this scenario, we would build a netbox source of truth supported by some Ansible or AWX to add some automated functionality on top of it. But it's not a piece of software. It's not just something that deterministically accepts input and produces the same kind of output. It has to exist in this complex organizational ecosystem where you're shaking hands and there's politics to be achieved across different silos. We have security concerns that we have to anticipate in these different business units. We got to deal with data. That data could come from a structured database. It rarely does. It usually comes from spreadsheets. Right, so you need to be prepared to work with teams to standardize data across the entire company once this is something that we want to pursue as an organization. And then finally, every team has their own interpretation of a process at the start. So we need to find ways to ingest these processes in a standard way and translate them into the automation platform that we're building. And like I mentioned this previously, but automation, it's living. It's living software because the underlying manual process that you automated, it's going to change. We're going to have mergers. We're going to have acquisitions. We're going to onboard new platforms. We're going to have multiple sources of truth that now need to be synced. We need to have parity between them. So anything we build, we have to design it in a way to be very changeable and modular. So why do these automation projects fail? I could have been the sole respondent to this. I have seen hundreds of failures. It would probably look similar to the numbers we have here. But this is also derived from that EMA survey. I'm going to highlight some of these that we're going to discuss in more granular detail. A lot of these are purely business challenges that you can't really address at a technical level. But the first of those that I've highlighted there in that red box is inter-silo conflicts. We don't have consistent security practices. We don't have standardized data. We can't agree upon who has precedent over this process. And so understanding how we can start to have that conversation allows us to bridge that silo. And we're going to talk a whole bunch about like anecdotal incidents and kind of remediation strategies for each of these problems. Moving on, the return on investment takes too long to realize. Every time we're automating something, typically there's a budget allocated and there are business goals. It can take too long to actually achieve these if we don't scope it properly and we don't identify what that time horizon is. When it comes to that return on investment, a lot of times we can't understand what the most impactful automation use case is. Where should we start? We get this analysis paralysis looking at the breadth of what we can do. Do we start with a source of truth? Do we start small and just start pushing config out to devices and then grow around that? It gets so difficult to understand where we could see the most value. And then the final one is that unclear business value for investment. Why should I invest in the first place? Convince me that this is worth the time and money. Now, the technical challenges are also just like covertly business challenges as well. A lot of them deal with complexity in interfaces between technologies and platforms that are a result of non-standardization, right? So the first one, we have integration issues. We just can't integrate with other systems. This could be technical, or again, it could be the lack of documentation that's been discussed repeatedly on this stage. It could be that processes are non-standard and they just can't work together. Moving down, we have network complexity or lack of standards. Again, that is a business decision that should have been made. We should have had standardization at the start. Now we can't really have interoperable systems. For a purely technical challenge, we have just the tool is really tough to use. And we're going to look at that in depth as we proceed to some of the challenges that I personally have observed. But if a tool is too complex, it will fall into disuse and we no longer have automation. If we have fractured sources of truth, we have disparate systems that different teams use, we have no source of truth. Two sources of truth is no truth, right? Unless you have the automation that can actually achieve parity between them. And finally, tool stability, that's just classic technical stuff, right? It could be slow, it could be non-performant, and in that case, the automation falls into disuse as well. And you're starting to see that these challenges, again, are a result of a lack of conversation and direction at the start of a broad automation program. So having seen this many, many times, we wanted to create a strategy that would let us lay down the foundations for really successful automation programs. And kind of the future state, the ideal manifestation of that is something we've called like the automation factory. And this would be an organization in a networking business or any business whatsoever that wants to automate any process that is capable of iteratively developing effective automation. And we'll start with the stakeholder request. What we want to be able to do is consolidate our existing processes, our existing people that have skills and expertise in their relative domains, and the data that automation depends upon. And we want to create this business unit that can take in stakeholder requests, identify what impact we're going to make from these requests, help the teams understand what needs to be done to achieve automation. We want to develop it at some point, and then we want to deploy it and maintain its life cycle. And the maintenance of that life cycle is something that has to, it involves adjusting to the manual process as it changes. It involves ingesting telemetry data and actually measuring the usage of that automation. How frequently is it being run? What is the actual time savings enjoyed? Because that was the intent of the automation in the first place. And all of these we're going to look at in more granular detail as we proceed. But when we have implemented this, and it's never been perfectly designed and implemented, but when we take components of this and impose it upon some more sophisticated automation programs, we do see the results. So to kind of capture some of these more ambiguous problems that organizations are plagued with once they try to do really broad-scale automation, I have created some terminology that is probably a replication of terms that exist already in a lot of different industries, but I made it a clever acronym so I wouldn't forget it. So you can see on the left, we spell auto down that left column. And these are qualities that we've kind of determined will indicate the health or the success of an automation program. So for agility, how quickly can your automation react to changes in the underlying manual process? For Unity, how consolidated is your automation? Is it disparate? Does some guy have a script over here and you should have run his script, but you ran that guy's script and that guy, that's old, and now everything's broken? Do we have AWX and AAP over here? Is there some rogue netbox instance that's hanging out somewhere? So just understanding that we need to centralize all that automation. When it comes to transparency, so this is a bit vague of a problem. It's something I did not anticipate we'd run into, but we did repeatedly. When there are the process owners that know the underlying technology and they are SMEs in their domain, and you bring in people that focus on automation, you can have this black box in which the people who actually need to invoke the automation and really need to understand what it's doing no longer have insight into what's going on. It's just this impenetrable Python, or it's some sort of Java Spring Boot application. They don't really know what's happening in it. So how can we surface that process and make sure it's really intuitive what it's doing? And we're going to take a look at some ways that that's been achieved. And finally, the most critical of these is objectivity. It needs to be something measurable. It needs to be something I can point at the end of the quarter, at the end of the day, and say, this was run 300 times. As per our rough estimates of the manual process, we have achieved this success in our automation program. If we don't do that, which before I never did, they would say, how's automation going? Great, it hasn't broken. I assumed it wouldn't break, that's why we paid you. But how well is it doing financially? Said, well, it hasn't broken. That's all I can tell you. So we wanted to put some frameworks in place to track that. And then just the words on the right that I'm going to be just chatting about, process owners, people who own the manual process. Automation owners, people that are responsible for translating that into an automated workflow. And then sprawl is just how many business silos are we navigating through in this process. So the first one that I'll talk about in the context of some different engagements is that agility. How quick can I change in response to the underlying business conditions? And we lost an engagement because we weren't able to match the speed at which golden configuration was changing. So I'd work with this senior committee that was blessing the golden config templates. And they'd tell me, this is the new template. Here's the parameters that you need to fetch dynamically. By the time that would be implemented into automation, it would take another month to secure a meeting with this team and get their approval on the automation before we deployed it. In that month, the golden configuration had changed, and now what I wrote was obsolete. So now I have new orders, we implement it, and again, this happened like 3 times until I was too humiliated to continue, and we looked at their process. And we figured out a way using like a GitOps driven pipeline that they can actually push the config templates to Git. We set up processes to have PR reviews. By the time that PR is opened, our team is concurrently doing the automation. So we took their like 2-month procedural process down to several days, and we're able to actually show them what the ingress would be to get their configuration templates to the automation. And you can also see here we have, this has happened a whole bunch, but on the top we have an automated process that just goes straight from ServiceNow CMDB as the ingress to day 0 ZTP. Many times there will be another source of truth chosen to supplement that CMDB. If the process owners say, actually we want that to go to Netbox first, how quickly can we make that change? Right? And so that's a function of your documentation as an organization. It's a function of the modularity of your code. It's a function of the communication channels that exist between these two teams. But that measure of how quickly you can respond is what we refer to as agility. For Unity, we just want to make sure it's all under one roof. If it's not, we have some warring factions with different automation, and there's true believers of each of these workflows, and we really can't achieve any sort of parity and make forward progress. So what we've seen lead to success in these engagements is agreeing upon an ingress at the start. It could be ServiceNow Service Catalog. It could be a custom portal. It could just be a backend API that still doesn't have any sort of UI layered atop it. But there needs to be that discussion, and we need to understand organizationally, this is where automation lives. Once we do that, it lets us tie in pretty easily to the invocation of automation. How many times are you running it? How long is the automation running? How much time are we saving in general? I can generate reports from that portal. That portal should be the most northbound system in the automation platform, and it's going to dispatch down to the lower level orchestrators. But another side effect of this psychologically is once you show the portal off and it's visual, you get a lot more engagement with automation. I'll run scripts on a terminal. I'll show them stuff running on AWS. That's cool. Feels like nerd stuff, but it looks like it's doing automation. The minute there is a portal and we're visualizing results from the automation, that's where a lot of the creativity and imagination gets unlocked from people that need automation. They go, oh, well, could you add another tab that actually applies this config? And that's where we start to see the true returns. For transparency, one thing that we've seen here is if we get a request and we build some pretty complex inscrutable automation, they just have to trust that it does what we've said it does. The process owners and experts no longer feel as if they have any agency in what's being done. And so we've needed to develop ways to really intuitively visualize what's going on in the automation. So they can look at it and say, actually, we want to be agile in our automation, and we no longer have that process. We deviate and we do this instead. And you can do that through automatic generation of code. You can use Mermaid to render these graphs. There's a lot of different ways to create documentation out of your code base. But what we found leads to the most success is really tightly coupling that process to the automation using workflow orchestration platforms. Things like AWX allows you to do these workflows. Things like Camunda are built for these kind of business processes that allow you to consolidate the technical execution of automation with business processes. So if you have a big process that requires manual approval, we use things like Camunda to actually visualize that, and that orchestrates the code. So once we have something like that, the consumers of automation can look at it and go, that is doing what I wanted it to, or that is, where did you hear that from? That's awful. So this is how we have those kinds of conversations. For objectivity, this one's pretty obvious. We just need to know what we're doing. We need to know the success of our automation. How many times is it running? What was our intended KPI? Why did we start developing this automation? And are we satisfying that? So in many engagements, there will be no KPI at the start. Again, someone got a budget and they said, could you just make yourself busy and just start automating some stuff? In the more successful engagements, we've met with the customers and talked to them about what they actually want to implement. What's the bottom line KPI? Sometimes it's manual ticket reduction. They just want automated resolution to tickets opened in ServiceNow or Jira. Sometimes it's just reduction of OpEx. Sometimes it's configuration compliance percentage. Once we know that, once I know what the North Star is, we can actually start really objectively measuring the automation that we want to build. So they could say, like, I think we should do ZTP. But then we'll say, you actually said that the goal of this entire automation program is to do automated ticket resolution. So does that bring us closer to that goal? So it helps us have conversations about what the most effective automation to develop for our network is. So we'll take a look at how this manifests as a technical deliverable, what we actually do. Once we've had these conversations, we know what we want to accomplish as an automation platform. How do we translate that into more sophisticated automation programs? And it typically starts just by doing it, right? We have a goal. That goal could be lofty, and it could involve really complex UIs and just metrics and telemetry being collected and displayed. But we need to see results pretty quickly. And we do that by just, again, understanding what platform we eventually want to target. If it's AAP in Ansible, then we start building Ansible playbooks that can be implemented in AAP. We want to make sure that we have a path to that increased complexity and sophistication. So we just get it running, because the only way to get actual feedback is to show consumers of automation what we're doing and what the outcomes are. Once that's done, we work with them to operationalize it, get it into CI/CD pipelines, as has been discussed, introduce DevSecOps best practices, making sure we're not leaking secrets, doing linting, just ensuring that we have a high standard of code that we're pushing. This also usually serves as this call to arms where everyone, once we've established these repositories, have the pipelines, you'll have these developers that have had their scripts that they've written, they'll be embedded into the CI/CD pipeline. That gives us a lot of foundation to build off of. Once we get a lot of scripts that people have been sitting on and they're all consolidated, that's where we can start we get almost instant wins by chaining these together. After that comes the orchestration layer, where we take the automation that was built and we integrate it into something larger, something that will support organizational consumption. So once it's embedded into AWS, we have like APIs that are exposed, and we have all the metrics that we can track, and that gives us a kind of standardized platform through which people can access automation. Again, that's that ingress that we talked about, that unity where we can consolidate everything. Also at this point, we're trying to adhere to the Network Automation Forum's automation platform architecture. Right? We want those sources of truth, sources of intent. We want the orchestrator layer to make sure that we're prepared for future growth in this automation platform. After that point, we're looking at event-driven automation typically. Now that we can invoke automation, we want to make sure that we have the capacity to ingest telemetry, to capture signals throughout our system, and then run the automation in a closed loop fashion. A lot of times, we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but one of the primary currencies you pay with in automation is trust. You develop the Python, you develop the Ansible, and you just trust that it works. But each step in this roadmap requires more trust. So before we start doing that closed loop event-driven automation remediation, maybe you just alert users and say, hey, I'm the automation, and I would have done this because I detected these signals. As the NOC or any individuals running this start to see that that invocation was correct, that's where we close that loop and actually have it do the remediation. At that point, we should have a foundation that is stable enough to encourage a broader adoption of automation. Usually at this point, there's other teams that get wind of this, and there's whispers of some upstart automation program. And we increase the size of that umbrella and pull these other teams into automation. So here we go from just doing configuration application to maybe just provisioning with Terraform and then pulling that into day one operations. And then finally, the end goal of every program is to have some sort of AI component. There's going to be a lot of discussions about AI in some upcoming presentations. But to our end, we just want to make sure that we have structured an automation program that is capable of that AI integration eventually. We want to make sure our documentation, our telemetry data, the actual code that's going to run, they're all in alignment and ready for someone to layer on some sort of agentic AI, and they'll be able to access all the critical data they need to invoke this. When it comes to use cases, this is kind of a genericized roadmap that we follow with different teams and different automation programs. It's a function of the technologies they have. It's also a function of the maturity and their KPIs that they want to pursue. But typically, when we build a use case roadmap, I have those conversations with the main stakeholders. And that's where we understand what the goal is. Once we have that, I look at all the different teams that want to be included in this automation program, and that's where we have discussions and discovery sessions about what the biggest pain points they have are. We see if they align with the core goals of the automation program, and then that becomes the impact of the use case that we're going to develop. In the case of that automated remediation engagement, I didn't really say how that turned out because the resolution was not automation. It was the greatest delivery we'd ever had. 70% of their tickets were requests from users to reboot their EC2 instances. So we did this deep data analysis and we said, hey, so it turns out there's not much to automate here. We can actually hit your 70% goal by sending them a link to your knowledge base that is right over here. So we instantly took care of 70% of the tickets. So once you understand what that high-level goal is, we can build a roadmap by taking that impact that that use case will achieve, weighing it against the complexity of the development of that use case. So here you can see kind of a typical sequence that's followed. We'll just begin with kind of an abstract pre-check, post-check framework. Anything you want to run, there's a module that we can plug it into that will execute arbitrary pre-checks, post-checks, and disseminate the results in some sort of channel that you've determined will work for your company. After that, we typically develop like OS upgrade workflows. It's a standard entry point for some of the more complex automation that follows, like ZTP. At that point, we want to make sure that we have that source of truth that's robust enough to support complex automation. So a lot of times there is Catalyst Center, there is Notabot, there is Netbox, there is Netcracker, and so what do we need to do to agree upon a canonical source of truth? And once you have that source of truth, you need to surround it with automated processes to make sure it remains that source of truth. Do we need a device onboarding workflow to make sure it gets added properly to the source of truth? Do we need to maintain that parity with other systems to ensure that we have that source of truth? Because if that source of truth is not viewed as such in your organization, people will stop using it. And if they stop using that source of truth, the automation will fail because we're no longer operating on the relevant data. Once that's done, we move on to some golden configuration operations. And this is one of the more complex. It's a fundamental use case, but an automation program's ability to fetch golden configuration, validate it organization-wide, deploy it to the automated pipelines, and push that is a pretty effective test of the maturity of that automation program. So we make sure that we have the processes in place that will allow them to achieve that golden configuration dissemination. After that, we usually do the event-driven architecture using Kafka as an event queue typically, or if they have any other preferred channels. And from there, we now have a strong enough technical foundation to take on really complex operations. Like we'll throw in secure ZTP if that was one of their priorities. If time to value of a device or config compliance was one of the metrics they were pursuing, that's where we'll choose to do secure ZTP. And then if we have the source of truth in place, we have our orchestration layers built out, that's where we can also do like massive like site provisioning. Now, I couldn't have a presentation without talking about AI, like everyone at some point has discussed. But what we found is that by orchestrating this automation platform in such a way where the use case is aligned with the documentation and the telemetry, we're measuring the health of the automation workflow. If we have a standardized way of structuring a repository, knowing the telemetry data we're ingesting to check the health of this automation workflow, and that's standardized across the entire automation program, we've aligned it for success in an agentic AI ecosystem, right? So it's something that could be abstracted way behind an MCP server, and the customer could use any type of LLM that they're interested in. We've created agents for customers before to take advantage of the automation that we've built, but we have a pretty repeatable process to make sure that that's something that could be done. We rarely do it because it takes a while to get to that level of maturity, but we make sure that it is ready for that agentic consumption. And we talked about the trust that you have to pay in an automated program like this. And there is no leap so great as this step, right? When you're gonna have these agents invoke your code. And so typically we have validated, trusted workflows that have been used by many individuals in the company for many months, and they've seen the actual impact of the automation and they trust it implicitly. Once that happens, it makes it a lot easier to tie it into this agentic ecosystem because there are guardrails that'll ensure that it behaves precisely as you want. And when we do this, we start with read-only operations and we closely track how it's going to get invoked, and then we eventually allow it access to the right operations once we've confirmed that it is making the right decisions based on the right signals coming in from telemetry. So this framework that we've kind of put together is it's not prescriptive. It is very obviously high level and more of a philosophy than kind of a technical discussion. But just the sheer number of failures we've seen as a result of communication breakdowns or organizational dysfunction or lack of vision at the start of an automation program has been a much larger root cause of failure than any sort of technical bottleneck that we've seen. So that is kind of what I wanted to discuss today. I hope that a lot of this, I hope not too much of this was familiar because I talked about failures all the time. So hopefully no one here has failed and you're shocked that the automation programs can go south. But I wanted to thank everyone for taking the time to be here and listen to this presentation. Does anyone have any questions for me about this?
We got lots of time for questions, so come on up, John.
Oh, hey, John.
It's great to hear back-to-back network automation, and in either one of them, I didn't hear a lot about configuration management. Do you find that network automation and configuration management are sometimes conflated, and there's so much more to network automation than just focusing on the BGP config or whatever?
Oh, 100%, 100%. That's a great question. Configuration management is kind of a bedrock of it because a lot of times the operations we're doing need configuration changes. We need to react to changing business conditions and modify our configuration. But you can see on this high level roadmap, there is so much more to the compliance, and there's a lot we have to do in our network to even begin to do that configuration compliance. So yeah, it is a massive component, but the most complex automation use cases we've seen are in the maintenance of that source of truth, are in the monitoring of the health of the network, and then making sure that we have enough channels to communicate the health of that network. But you need to have that golden configuration ecosystem in place to make the remediation steps. So it's a good question. All right. Any other questions for me? feel free to talk to me in the hallway about any of these failures that I've experienced and share your own. And I did really quickly before I go, I wanted to just mention that I'll if you do see me in the hallway, I did want to have a workshop kind of discussing this at a more technical level in the future. So I'd love to just get some names and emails of people who'd be interested in having conversations about this. But yeah, I want to thank you guys. It's been great.